Okay, let's do hand to table. Thank you, Elspeth. Ahoy!
Ahoy! Ahoy.
Okay, welcome today. We all survived the winter storm last night, so this looks pretty good here today. Nice, bright, sunny day here. All right, so we'll start with the blessing. And the blessing today we send our prayers to those who have suffered and may still be suffering in wars from lack of food. There are so many more today that are in this situation, from lack of shelter, from poor health, from not seeing their families because they are on the seas taking food and goods to various ports in the world. We are grateful for our opportunity to meet online, as we are doing now, meeting friends close and far afield. Our families and friends, the earth, all it offers us and those who are working to protect it. Our own personal blessings include our security, our country, and our democracy. Okay. We ask you bless this place and all who work here, especially those who have prepared and served our food today. We ask you to bless this food for our use and for us to your continued service. Please watch over us. All of those who cannot be with us today, keep us forever and always mindful of the needs of others. May we remember these things every day. Amen. All right, and our land acknowledgement. Oops, did I miss a step? Okay, you're right. Okay, thank you, Elspeth. By the way, I'm Wayne Parker, and I'm subbing for Diane today, who is unfortunately under the weather. So Elspeth is keeping me on track here, and I missed a step here. And so what we need is a toast to the king. To the king.
God bless him.
And sailors everywhere.
And sailors everywhere. Okay, back on track here. The land acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which this building is standing is the traditional territory of many nations. We honor and thank the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederation, which includes Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, the Huron-Wendat people, and the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people living in Toronto or Toronto now. So from there, let's see here. Okay, so welcome everyone. So a couple of housekeeping things here. I'm just going to ask if people would please ensure that their cell phones are on silent. There will be Zoom breakout meetings as well later today. Also, annual donations, $25. Thank you for those who have already made their contributions. And we have trivia today. Trivia is present arms. The present arms salute was originally a specific and friendly gesture, meaning literally presented to you to take as you wish. And we will move now to our shanty, and today's shanty will be Sally Brown, page 7 of our books. She drinks rum. Cracker, said by honey, Sally Brown. Brown, right on that. With the go, she drinks rum and moves back. On the years, I quoted Sally. Sad. Not sent. Okay, that's, we can let it go at that. Okay, thank you, folks. Singing is not my forte. All right, so, couple of things. There are just a few things here. There are books still available in the box at the back of the room. So if you wish, please choose a book from the box. And the other thing we ask is if you please put a toonie in the dory, contribute to our guest speakers lunch. And now we're going to introduce our guest speaker. Gonna let Philip get to his seat. All right. So today, our guest speaker is one of our own, Ron Jenkins. And he's going to give us a little history on Hanlan's Point. Ron is a longtime member of the National Yacht Club here. His father, Alf, was past purser of shellbacks, a Class A dinghy sailor, and an active keelboat owner. And even his grandfather, Herb, was the National Yacht Club treasurer for decades and active keelboat sailor. Carrying the Jenkins name well back in National Yacht Club history, I think sailing is clearly in the Jenkins family blood. Ron is an active nature and sailing photographer. When hobbies do not interfere, he works in technology marketing. In the technology area, Ron is our webmaster. He weekly records the sessions and uploads them to our web, in addition to loading our schedule and other pertinent information. In photography, since COVID began, he daily posts an interesting little puzzle on a picture, as a picture on his Facebook page. He is an active participant in Waterfront for All, a coalition of groups protecting Toronto's waterfront. Ron's topic today, a history of Hanlan's Point. Today, Ron will take us through the many identities Hanlan's Point has taken over its years. Among them, a sandbar, a military station, a cottage resort, a sports field, an amusement park, and an airport. Today is Ron's 14th time speaking to us. I think he might hold the record for that. Anyway, please give him a warm welcome. Ron, all yours. Thank you.
We have to double click it together.
I think I'm in frame now, am I?
No.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Thank you for coming and welcome to the people on Zoom. I'm going to talk today about Hanlan's Point, which is right over here. And it's got quite an interesting history. 2 clicks, there we go. So what is Hanlan's Point? It's a series of shifting geographical locations. It's a location that's been shaped by water, wind, fire, politics, and development over the years. And it's variously a sandbar, a refuge, a military site, a neighborhood, a transit hub, an amusement park, a beach, a recreational site, a viewpoint, a sports venue, a hotel, and an airport. It's also a disappearing memory these days. For the First Nations, the first users of this territory, Hanlan's Point was named, or the island was named Minsling, meaning on the islands, and it was seen as a place of healing and rejuvenation, and was used for childbirth ceremonies and burials. Hunting, fishing, and wild rice were food sources drawn there, and it moved from First Nations control to European, I guess you'd say, control. The British government in the Toronto Purchase of 1787 modified in 1805 and settled finally in 2010. So in 1828, when this picture was painted, Hanlan's was already on the edge of a fairly busy harbor. And you can also see some of the uses here. These people are, I think, possibly First Nations, but picnickers in any case. I didn't mean to jump ahead. Let me back it back. Okay, anyway. In later times, on the theme of healing and rejuvenation, it was the site of the Lakeside Home for Little Children, which was a branch of the city hospital. And each summer, children were brought there. Map views give you some idea of what was going on. This is the earliest map I can find, 1788. Here, there are a couple of things to notice, but I'm not sure how accurate the shape of the island is in this picture. However, there are soundings taken marking the depths of the water. And up in the top corner, it says remains of a trading fort. That's over on the exhibition grounds. That was a French fort. So in 1788, it was that way. 1802, I think we have a more accurate map, and what you can see down in here is a blockhouse identified, and also that the point is called Gibraltar Point. The blockhouse paired with a blockhouse up on the shore at the garrison, and that is now what we call Fort York. And those 2 points guarded the entranceway to the harbor, and Blockhouse Bay is still called Blockhouse Bay today, down in here. Gibraltar Point was the name of this piece of land all through the 19th century, right up until the 20th century. Incidentally, and not really on topic, is Ashbridges Bay over here, which at the time was marshland and, as it says, wild hay and so on. That was later filled in. This view is much later, 1884, and probably somewhat more accurate. What you see here is Gibraltar Point again. It says also Hanlan Hotel. And it shows a couple of wharves, and it also shows lots laid out here for property. And in 1885, again, we get a little more precise. And what we see here is 2 spits of land coming up. The westernmost reaches up almost to the land here, marking the western channel in through Queen's Wharf. And Queen's Wharf here is actually where Lakeshore and Bathurst are today. The old fort is Fort York, and the Stanley Barracks is over on the exhibition place grounds. Also down in here, you can see a lighthouse. Also to notice here, you see a Hotel Hanlan, you see a stadium, and you see a walkway, it says over to Turner's Baths. That was a bridge that crossed that body of water. In 1910 and through actually a period before 1910, one company called Goads made property insurance atlases, and in these detailed atlases, you can also see, this is the southern part of the island. You can see down here, oops, I didn't mean to go forward, that didn't go forward, good. You can see that's the Lakeside Children's Home. That's the lighthouse that still exists. And going up this way, you see something called Lakeshore Avenue, not to be confused with Lakeshore Boulevard, with residences. And you can also see, this map's a little confusing because it's in two parts. If you take the left side and attach it up onto the right side, what you see, the bottom here, continued from above, fits up onto the top here. So you have the two spits of land, and you have a little gap in here between the first gap and second. That's the walkway across to Turner's Baths, and there were residences going further up that way. And over here was the Hanlan's Point entertainment area. At this point, by 1910, you also had a new Western Channel, which is our Western Gap today. So for a short period, there were two Western Gaps. The old Western Gap, called the Western Channel, that went across right about where Lakeshore Boulevard is, and the new Western Gap, which is today's Western Gap. Here you can see it laid out with less detail, but as a more complete picture. The Western Channel, the new channel being at the top. Hanlan's Bay, as it's identified in here. And Hanlan's Point is what it's now called. No longer called Gibraltar Point. Somewhere along the way, Gibraltar Point, the name got shifted down to the southern tip of the island. Aerial views, this is 1919, show a few things of interest. Oh, I guess I should have also pointed out back here. This spot here was the location of the National Yacht Club from 1890 to 1919, right on Queen's Wharf. This aerial view was taken in 1919, in fact, and it shows the entertainment district, the amusement park, the roller coaster, a water tower, keep that in mind, and ferry docks, and the stadium. Also up in here is the old National Yacht Club clubhouse, sitting on newly formed land in its location just to the east of where we currently are. All the way up this stretch in the treat area were residences, cottages, as they were called. This is taken the same day, probably by the same aircraft, just a southern view of the same thing, but you also have some of the cityscape in the background in the upper part. So the Hanlan's Point Amusement Park had a number of wonderful features. I don't have any pictures of the freak show, but it did have the aerial swing, which had a distinctive sort of girder structure, and it would spin these flying boats, or whatever you want to call them, around in a circle. In the background here is the ball stadium that existed at the time, and I'll talk more about stadiums later. The amusement park also had the drive yourself ride is what it was called. And it's famous for its diving horses. The diving horses weren't there all the time. That was a traveling exhibition that went to various carnivals and festivals and so on. J.W. Gorman's diving horses, there were two of them, King and Queen, identified on the right. Also in this picture, you can see that bridge, I guess I mentioned again, to go from the east spit to the west spit of Sandbar across there. And that's how people would get to those residences as well as to Turner's Baths. The roller coaster, the water tower, and docks and so on. The amusement park also had a midget railway. I'm including the word midget here because that's what it was called. It also, that railway ran up the east side of the amusement park promenade, which faced out onto the harbor and circled around at the top. There's still a miniature railway running on Center Island now for Centerville. Canadians seem very fond of these things. It had a merry-go-round with a distinctive roof. You can see this in a number of shots of Hanlan's Point. And it had a big slide called the Hurdle Gurgle. Who thought the name up? I don't know. There were also other things in here, ball games, the glass ball game for cigars. You could win cigars, I guess, if you did whatever was required. The boardwalk ran along the east side, as I mentioned. At the north end of the boardwalk was a roller coaster. You can see some of the city shoreline up in the top here. These are grain elevators. That one is the northern grain elevator, which you can locate on maps and find out exactly where that is. And you'll notice some sailing dinghies racing in this shot here, right off the edge of the promenade. The earliest version of a roller coaster at the park was built in 1889. It was called a switchback. The switchback was not a term unique to this one, but it says here at the bottom, switchback Hanlan's. The switchback roller coaster was the first concept of a roller coaster, which basically took you down a track to an end and then brought you back the other way. So it didn't take you in a circuit. But the patent for the switchback railway, called here Inclined Plane Railway, was 1878. So it wasn't long after 1878 that Toronto had a switchback railway here. And you can see that the cars would run down one of the inclines and then get hoisted up on a winch, and then they could run back the other way. A little later was this one called the Figure 8. And it was on the east side of the ballpark. There was also a Tours of the World building here, and I don't know what was inside the Tours of the World. Probably exhibits of things brought from far away. So the Figure 8 roller coaster was replaced later by the Rager. It says here the Rager, 10 cents. So that's what you'd pay to ride. Over in the background here, you can also see the top of the aerial flying boats there. Dining there included a few different spots. This place was called the Grotto. Breakfast, luncheon, and dinner. I can't see the prices in the photograph, I'm sorry. So I don't know what you paid to eat in the Grotto, but inside the Grotto you had little booths there and a ceiling hung with, I don't know what those were, grotto pieces ceiling. There were stalls. This one is the Flora Du Red Hops stall. It had other names at other times in pictures I found. There was the Lakeshore Palm Gardens. This picture is 1934 now. And yes, there are palm trees there, so it does justify the name. And the pavilion dining room, much bigger space with, wooden bench seats and designed to feed a lot of people in a hurry. There was a dance hall and flower garden. pictured here in 1929. There was roller skating. There was the whip, kind of the carnival ride that you might still see at carnivals today. This other picture of the whip caught my eye because there was a little Victory Bonds poster stuck up on the wall, and I found a full-size color version of it. That was 1914. So this was First World War. There was also the Midway, so you can see large crowds. You can see the ferries coming in. Here's the Hurgle Gurgle again over on the right. And the Midway had, there's your Floridew. Now it says corn and popcorn ice cream, something in popcorn factory, right there, same building. Here's the merry-go-round again. And the amusement stage here in the center had different entertainments going on. Looks like they've got some kind of a cannon set up there. People are watching something on the amusement stage in the center of the Midway. Hanlan's Hotel went through different versions. This is the early version of Hanlan's Hotel. John Hanlan apparently lived at the east end of the harbor on a boat that got blown to the west end in a storm, and he decided that was where his family should live. So they put their house there, and then later he started renting rooms and built the hotel. So that looks like his house right there. And this was the hotel, which at its peak had about 25 rooms. Then the hotel expanded significantly, being a successful venture. Well, before that, this is another painting, 1875, and you can see the old hotel right there on the shore. This is 1885 now. There was a new hotel built, much grander, quite respectable looking actually. And there was a dock for it there, Doty's Ferry Line over on the left. And then the hotel was expanded with an additional story and a different structure on the roof with gables, sort of peaks instead. Lots of boats. This was a boathouse here, the rowing club. And in the background there, you can again see that top of the aerial flying boats. This picture puzzled me for a long time because these people in the foreground, these kids in particular, are standing in shin deep or even ankle deep water. And I was wondering how that could be, in the harbor. I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, thinking maybe it hadn't been dredged yet or something like that. I'll get to the answer to that, but. I'm sorry? Today. If things go well. Yeah, but here's another view of the hotel. And what you can actually see now is that it is actually not on the harbor side of that spit, it's on the lagoon side of that spit, between the east spit and the west spit. Lots of boating activity in between. So what I was trying to figure out why it could be so shallow was because those children would have been standing on or near the shore over here for that photo to be taken with the hotel in the background. This whole area between the two sandbars was very shallow. Here's another view, the Hotel Hanlan. Another thing that was confusing, and I didn't show the picture, but the other side of it looks quite different. I thought, here's, I don't have to censor this. This is a stereoscopic picture. This was for the kind of viewers where you would have two images slightly displaced. You can actually see the heads of the boys lining up with the boys in the canoe they're slightly different here and here. If you put on the goggles and looked at it properly, you'd see some kind of a 3D rendering. This is 1895, as it says at the bottom. There's the Hanlan Hotel and the rowing club over on the left. Ferries to Hanlan's Point left from the city side. This particular photo, right down here, it says Hanlan's Point. And you get on ferries there, run across to the point. You can also see the RCYC up that one here. Right there. Arriving at Hanlan's Point, this is crowds entering the fairground or the amusement park. There's the merry-go-round right there. A lot of this had to do with this guy called Lawrence was his property. He was tightly connected with the Toronto Ferry Company. In 1891, he married Emma Hanlan, who was the widow of John Durnan, but she was born Hanlan. She was the sister of Ned Hanlan, the famous rower. And Ned Hanlan sold the hotel because it was his father's building and the island lease to the Toronto Ferry Company. The Toronto Ferry Company was a merger of the Doty Ferry Company and Timon's Island Ferry Company. So those two ferry companies merged into the Toronto Ferry Company. And we saw in an earlier picture a dock for Doty's ferry. And this is now the Toronto Ferry Company. They built an enlargement on the hotel. They built the amusement park, or expanded it really. And in 1897, they built the Hanlan's Point Stadium. This was the stadium that was the site for the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team and the Tecumseh lacrosse team. And Solomon emerged eventually as the sole owner of the Toronto Ferry Company, the amusement park, the baseball stadium. So he had essentially a monopoly. And he could bring paying customers on his ferries over to his amusement park. And it worked very well. The city, however, purchased the Toronto THC, should be TFC, I'm sorry there. The Toronto Ferry Company in 1926. It might have even been a forced sale. They might have tried to break up a monopoly. But that didn't actually deter Solomon, who had a number of other ventures. He became in 1907 the general manager and syndicate partner in the Royal Alexandra Theatre. He was the vice president of Lowe's Theatres. He was a syndicate partner in the Arena Gardeners, which later became Mutual Street Arena by name. And he had the franchise for the Toronto Arena as the hockey team, later became the St. Patrick's and later became the Maple Leafs. They played at his Mutual Street Arena until moving to the Maple Leaf Gardens in 1931. And his brother was running Sunnyside Amusement Park from 1922. And Lowell Solomon was a principal shareholder at Sunnyside. And then in 1926, he built the Maple Leaf Stadium, which I'll talk about a little bit further. So as far as stadiums go, over on Hanlan's Point, actually, I will ask you a trivia question. How many stadiums were at Hanlan's Point? You say 1?
10.
10's high. You've got a correct answer there. It's 3. Yeah. So the first Hanlan's Point Stadium was built in 1897, and in 1903 it was burned in a fire. The second one was built and occupied in 1908. 1909, another fire. 1910, the third Hanlan's Point Stadium was built. That was the location of Babe Ruth's first professional homer in 1914. And then in 1926, the Maple Leaf Stadium was built on the city side right over here. Why this is called Stadium Road. And in 1937, the Hanlan's Point Stadium was demolished for airport construction, and in 1928, the Maple Leaf Stadium over here was demolished. So I don't have a good picture of Stadium number 1, but Stadium number 2, I think, is kind of partly built around Stadium number 1. Stadium number 1 was probably mostly bleachers. And Stadium number 2, what wasn't burned after the first fire, was covered over like that. Here's again your aerial ride here again. So that's the first merging into the second stadium. But after that fire, this was built much bigger. This one could seat 17,000 people. Got an entrance there for a buffet too. Probably had a lot of other attractions. This is the Maple Leaf Stadium, which we probably all would remember, at the corner of Stadium Road and Lakeshore Boulevard near Bathurst there. Down in this picture, you can also see, this picture is 1947, so they haven't taken out these buildings yet. That was Little Norway for the Norwegian Air Force. Down in the corner here are some boats for the National Yacht Club. Tip Top Tailors, obviously, over in the red. And a few other local items. This was a sports venue for the baseball team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the lacrosse team, the Tecumsehs, the Toronto Tecumsehs. These were teams again under management of Solomon. And there was other stuff going on in the sporting line, like women with an egg race and people doing high diving.
They're a professional sport.
I've got more than one picture of women running with eggs on spoons.
I like professional.
It looks like it, yeah. Boating was big, obviously. You can see, now this picture is taken in between the two sandbars in that lagoon. And you can see buildings along the top there. This is the regatta at a regatta at Hanlan's Point. So what you see in this picture is Hanlan's Hotel. I don't know what went from a circle to a red dot. There we go. Okay, so Hanlan's Hotel. This is the Boathouse Rowing Club here. And then this is the side of the number 2 stadium. So the stadium is just inside that wall. And then lots of boating activity at the regatta. Down in the further reaches, the southern reaches of the lagoon, is that bridge across over to the western sandbar. And then there was the fire in 1909. And that fire burned everything you see in this picture and more. So it burned the second stadium, the boathouse, and the hotel. Hanlan's Point, this is the inscription that I cropped off at the bottom of the photo. Pavilion and aerial ships destroyed by fire. The pavilion was one of the parts in there. And the aerial ships, the structure for the aerial boats is still there, but the boats were all burned. The School of Fun and Penny exhibit were also destroyed, and I wish I knew what the School of Fun and Penny exhibit was. But we don't. I don't know if anybody knows. The Gem Theater and Figure 8. Figure 8 was that roller coaster, also destroyed by fire on the same day. So that fire went from the lagoon side to the eastern side, right across that whole stretch of the spit. This is what was left of the rowing club and bar. There was a bar in the rowing club, as should be. The West Sandbar had cottages built on it. So this is taken from the East Sandbar looking west. And this is also taken from the east sandbar looking west, and you can see in the background the exhibition place, the C&E grounds, right in here. That's still there. I forget what that's. Is that the horticultural building with the sort of dome? You could probably date the picture accurately from the buildings that are in view there. People came by boat. This is a good bit to the south again. This is the lighthouse. I'm not talking much about the lighthouse, but that's the lighthouse keeper's house. And these are residences in that southern portion of the spit area. So some of these were cottages on the sandbar, and more along on the main bar were residential habitations. This is Hanlan's beach, right out here. Very often, lots of pictures of a crowded beach. And someone was asking about the nude beach. I censored the beach itself, but just put out the sun. This was Turner's Baths, which was at the crossway over from the west or the east to the west. Inside here, I think it was just really like change houses for swimming in the water. This was the bridge across from the east to the west. Aviation was also going on here. Hanlan's Point Air School in 1912. You notice this is a float plane. There were no runways. If you wanted to fly in and out of Toronto, it was on a float plane. This is a slightly later version of a plane called the Curtis. Notice that they're towing the Curtis. This guy's lying down and it looks like he's having a cigarette. And a couple of people are on the airplane. This is being towed through the Western Gap from east to west. And if you're at all familiar with, it's not clear in the picture, but right there is a girderwork tower that's still there today, the inner end of the harbor. So that gives you the whole orientation for where that is. This would be about 200 feet that way. And this is another view of the air school. They're refueling, and this guy is actually holding a canister of fuel and pouring it into the plane. It's another one of the float planes again. Notice in the background, what can you see here? That's the roller coaster and the water tower that I mentioned. That's the boathouse right there. Sorry, that's the ball stadium rebuilt. So this is on the east side of the western spit. Eventually, this was converted into airport lands, and what you'll see as it's happening, this is 1937, so this is new lake filling right here. This is that western sandbar all covered in trees, and a few of the residences are in view there. And then back in the corner here, just concealed a little bit, is the roller coaster looking across that lagoon. This is another view. The lagoon hasn't been filled in yet. That's the girderwork tower that I was talking about right there. And then on the other end was that little white building. Those two buildings together made a range light system for the Western Gap for aligning ships coming in. It's hard to see in this picture because the illumination isn't good, but on a computer screen, you can see inside these trees that haven't yet been cleared out, some of the cottages. They're landlocked now and probably abandoned, because in a year later, this would be an airport. the airport lands as they are today have a different, three different owners. I've talked about this probably endlessly now, but the green patches are the remaining sections of the east and west sandbars. So those two sandbars exist within the airport boundary, integrated into the landmass of the current airport. They are owned by the city. The yellow areas are owned by the Toronto Harbor Commission, now the Toronto Port Authority. They were filled in by the Harbor Commission. And then the two little brown bits at each end are federal Transport Canada owned lands, and I don't know why. But what that means is that the airport is operated in a tripartite agreement between these three bodies. But it's quite interesting to me that these sandbars that were there from the 1800s play a role in the ownership of today's airport. And then, of course, we have artificial intelligence. I don't say, you know how you see these pictures of a squirrel infested with mussels and things like that, faked images. Well, that didn't happen yesterday. So here we have liftoff away from Hanlan's. This is fake. Everything across the bottom here is right. There's your merry-go-round and your aerial boats and your stadium and your figure-8 roller coaster and the boat sailing down in here. All of that is correct. This is not correct. I mean, they didn't even actually, I'll call it Photoshop. They didn't get the whole tail wing in there. There's no place for a plane to take off here. Now, flying over Hanlan's here, look at that wonderful wing walking little boy standing there. Here's the merry-go-round. There's the aerial boats. That's one of the pavilions in the midway. The little boy and his dad, they're sitting there. This is not a real plane. This is one of these photo montages. You could probably go to Hanlan's and stand on a mock-up of a plane and get your picture taken. Photoshopped, not photoshopped. Same here. These people are not on the Bluebell. They're posing on a photo model for the purposes. I mean, you can tell, if you look a little further, you can see that these people here are in exactly the same position as these people here. Everything's the same. The smoke is the same. Yeah. Somebody's, and here's another picture of the Bluebell at Hanlan's Point. Now, a lot of these were postcards that had a photograph that was subsequently retouched in color. So colorizing, of course, was a standard thing. A lot of the photos in this slideshow come from postcards of the time that were hand painted to do that. And here's people coming off the Bluebell. And here's people coming off the Bluebell at night. The thing is, this picture are exactly the same picture. The people are all in the same places, right? Somebody has made this a night scene with paint. They painted in a moon. Oops. They painted in a moon. They painted moonlight on the water. They created a whole fantasy thing. Anyway, that's Hanlan's. Today, I mean, what exists of Hanlan's is still the docking area where it is now. And if you go over there, of course, you'll see markers, plaques talking about the stadium, talking about the Hanlan family, talking about things. And in fact, there's a tugboat up on the shore over there, the Ned Hanlan. that tugboat was the tugboat that used to be over at the Marine Museum on the CNE grounds. When it was a Marine Museum on the CNE ground. Anyway, yes,
What do you think caused the demise? Was it the road that caused the demise of all of the fairgrounds and all that, or just shrink away or?
okay, after, I'll just repeat what caused the demise of the Hanlan's Point. I should have been using my phone all this time. I hope you've been able to hear me all right. There were a few factors. One was, I think maybe the idea just got a little stale for people. Another was the automobile. Suddenly people could go a little further afield for their entertainment. They could go on drives into the country and so on. More people had cars than at the turn of the 20th century, when cars were fairly scarce. So between, the 1890s or whatever and the 1930s, car use increased greatly. And with that, and among those things also was the development of things like the Sunnyside area, which
Trains had a factor, well, trains.
trains would have been a factor. People could go further afield for their entertainment. They could also get entertainment on the city side. There was another thing over in Scarborough, another amusement park over in Scarborough with its own miniature railway as well. So Lowell Solman saw this coming and sold his ferries and got off the island and got involved in Sunnyside. So Sunnyside, I don't have any pictures showing the Sunnyside thing. There's still a pavilion there and a pool and so on, but it was a huge area at the time. It's interesting though, when you look at this amusement park and you look back, I think there are probably maybe hardly anyone who would even remember as a living memory this location. People would have to be around 100 years old maybe to have this as a memory of an entertainment site.
Oh, we have a question from George online.
Yes.
Fascinating, Ron. First of all, that midget railway, was it steam powered?
I don't know.
It wasn't emitting anything in
Yeah,
the picture.
I couldn't see any smoke, and it would have been not such a great job for the train operator to be sitting 5 feet behind the smokestack.
No,
So it may have been electric
or gasoline.
or some, yeah. Might not.
I tried reading glasses and a card between my eyes to see the stereoscope. You need the machine, I guess.
Yeah. So,
The different spelling of Hanlan, A-N or O-N?
well, the family property was spelled A-N. Often in the postcards, it's either O-N or I-N. And I've even seen Hanlous, Hanless. One of the postcards spells it that way. So they weren't too strict on the spelling.
There was in 1911 a proposal by maybe the harbor commissioners to build Lakeshore Boulevard coming to the Western Gap, across the gap and around the outside of the island all the way to Ashbridges Bay. That was never a real idea.
I have pictures of that plan. I've got just photos of maps. I didn't put them into the presentation, but that was an idea, that there would be a road, as you described, right through what's now Queen's Wharf Bathurst Quay, and through what's now Airport Land, down right through the island, through across the Eastern Gap and into the eastern reaches of the waterfront. That never happened, obviously. But it was a concept, it was a development plan. Yeah,
Thank you.
yes, Ron.
I have two memories. One was going to the ballpark, and my mother making sure that I was dressed very warmly. It was always a cold breeze coming off the lake. And the other was buying some candy floss during the hot summer's day. And as I chewed on the candy floss, it got crunchier and crunchier. All the little bugs that the little no-see-ums were landing in the candy floss and getting stuck. And finally I noticed that they all had legs, so I didn't finish eating it.
Now, was that the Maple Leaf Stadium here on Stadium Road?
Yeah, a little
Yeah,
bit, yeah. In the early 50s.
Yes. Yes,
I can
So-
remember the Hanlan Point park there and the Midget Railway. I can remember going on the Midget Railway just before the beginning of the war. I think when they filled in the gap, the rails used to go right at the edge of the water, and you were looking over the water. And then the whole entertainment section of Hanlan Point disappeared finally at the beginning of the war. The finished airport and turned it into a little Norway. Well, the little Norway was on the city side, but the
yes,
facilities they used for training the Air Force were on the new finished island airport.
yes, yes. There was an aviation activity on those sandbars from the early 20th century, as I pointed out. I mean, the fact that there's an airport there now follows in a way from all of that, but it's quite interesting. You do point out that the entertainment district at Hanlan's didn't end immediately with the creation of the airport. It took a little while. So, you know, you could ride the railway long after the airport had opened. The airport opened in 1939,
Yeah.
and there would be a few years in between.
Couldn't do not much longer after that. I think it was 41 or 42.
That's right. Yeah,
When it packed up. And one thing I remember about the entertainment section there was a bandstand. And they had regular conferences of various bands. They were usually military bands. I remember my father played in the 48 Highlanders brass band, and they used to have regular sessions at the little
that's interesting.
band on the island there. It's fairly near the ferry dock.
Right, yes. I would have liked, I ran out of time more than anything, but I started to put together the layout of this whole area and where things were, because I could never find a map that showed me where the different parts of the entertainment area were, where the particular restaurants were, where the different pavilions were and the different rides. Some of them you see in multiple shots and you can pinpoint, but others, yeah, you can't.
But by the end of the 30s, it's getting pretty run down and not very widely patronized.
Yes, yes. Yeah, it declined and finally ended.
So we have a question from Seamus. Unmute yourself, Seamus.
Thank you, Ron. My congratulations on excellent research. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent research, and it brings back memories. Exactly 50 years ago, when I started out studying at university in Canada, I did a course, the history of sport as a mirror of Toronto society. And in those days, my research was limited by the technology available. But I was absolutely fascinated with your presentation. And I just want to mention a few things. Ned Hanlan was mentioned. I knew about Ned Hanlan before I ever came to Canada. In fact, right behind me in my apartment here, there's a photograph on the wall of Sarsfield Bridge in Limerick, and on it is stationed the Shannon Rowing Club, a little island, where Ned Hanlan was honoured. My late father was a non-rowing member of the Shannon Rowing Club. He was fluent in French as well, my father was, and he called it the Club des Hommes Perdus. There were no ladies in it. It was the Club of the Lost Men. And anyways, that's just an aside. But anyway, Ned Hanlan was known to my father and my grandfather's generation because he rode over in Ireland. And one other thing I want to mention was the story about Lol Solomon. I didn't know about, I often wondered about, and that was absolutely fascinating. The way he was, it reminded me of Monopoly, the way he juggled everything and anticipated the changes in the market as a result of the automobile. He would have done very well in today's economy, I think. But
Yes, I think-
go ahead. Sorry, Ron.
Oh, I was gonna say that really the only things that exist from his time of control are the Trillium, the ferry that's still running, that was restored, and the Royal Alex Theatre. But all the other ball stadiums and other ferries and things like that are all gone.
And I'll just end on one last thing. Quite a number of years ago, I think it would be about 15 years ago or more, the late Pam McConnell, she was a councillor at the City of Toronto. I didn't know. I think she was deputy mayor. But they had with Heritage Toronto, which I'm a member, used to be a member of, we used to go on walks around the city, and also that included the island. But they had a celebration on Gibraltar Point put on by the city, Heritage Toronto, and remnants of the English families. And the English family were long resident on the island, and they're like a diaspora. They're all over the world now. But many of them came together with photographs, which they shared with us. And it was a lovely Saturday in May or June at that time. And we were allowed to walk up the lighthouse and so forth. And we were also told a story that something about a murder there or something. But
Yeah,
yes, go on, Ron.
the lighthouse keeper was murdered.
Okay, well, as you can see, I wasn't murdered there that day, but it was absolutely fascinating. And afterwards, we socialized, very civilized, over tea, coffee, non-alcoholic drinks and sandwiches, reflection of Toronto the Good. And I got to know people. And as I got talking to them, I met a chap who I think he lives in California. And I think his grandfather ran taxis back and forth from the island to the mainland. Anyways, I could say an awful lot more, but I'm absolutely fascinated by your research skills, the way you collate it and bring it all together, and you do us all proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ron? Questions from George online?
Okay.
Go ahead, George. George, go ahead.
Okay, I was just thinking about Lol Solomon and Saul, his brother. I'm just presuming that Saul was the older one and he was called Saul for Solomon. And when Lawrence came along, they just nicknamed him Lol to go with Saul.
They were LOL, LOL, and Sol, SOL as the names. Yeah. John, yes.
I just got to add something about the baseball stadium. When I started crewing down here,
middle of the week when we finish around 8:30 at night. So there's baseball game. By that time, so the guys have given up on the game, wandered away. So we walk in, and I'm sitting around the third row, watch the rest of the game, usually watch several innings. Sometimes they go to several, sometimes they go to extra innings. Sometimes we'd see 9 innings. Cost was like this, so it was very heavy. What year was that to be? Oh, that was about,
Yeah.
I was 3 years older.
Philip, were you gonna say something? No. Yeah, the ball stadium stopped hosting the Toronto team, which moved over to the island. And the stadium got other uses for large picnics, and I've got a picture of a staging of Aida there, the opera. You know, they set up a stage in the middle of the ball field, without the elephants. But
They used to have football games there, high school football. I remember playing at the stadium there back in the 40s.
oh, okay. Well, if you have any pictures, I'd be interested.
I wish I did.
Yes,
I was just gonna say, I can remember when, they first allowed Sunday sports in Toronto. So the baseball team could play on Sunday. And one of the attractions once, my mother was horrified to have to go to ball game on Sunday. And, the attraction was the Diamonds singing Little Darling. For the game.
yeah, the island was a popular location for picnicking. I brought a photograph that you can take a look at over there. It's the National Yacht Club picnic on the island. The photograph is from 1927. And it's well, let me just grab it and hold it up for the people online. This is one of those panoramic shots. You can see the, yeah. It was the club picnic on the island, 1927. There are actually fewer people in the picture than you might think. Because some of them would get their picture taken at this end and then run around and appear in the other end. And the reason they could do that was because of the camera technology at the time, which I guess I can't show you now, but it was
Oh, fuck.
sitting on a rotating base, and it could pan around, and the film would roll through as it panned, so that it could compose a panorama. And this picture is taken that way. It was rolled up until late last year and in a scroll for 97 years. But anyway, I thought I'd get it framed. And the thing is, that's the size of the actual negative. You know, it was an 8-inch high roll of film rolled all the way across. So this was printed as a contact print. Yeah.
Point out, the same person.
Sure. This guy right here is over here again.
The guy with the tie was standing.
Yeah, you can see a few of them as when you start looking. The one here, this guy, and over there is Tom Turrell, who was a well-known dinghy racer in Toronto at the time. Yeah, you might remember Tom Turrell. He had only one arm, for most of his life. He had the reputation as being a very good heavy weather dinghy sailor. Despite having only one arm, he was nicknamed Storm King, which is still the name used by the club for its workboat.
When you go up the stairs at the RCYC to the fitness room, there are two pictures on the west wall, right at the top of the stairs. And one of them is Turtle sailing with the one arm and a pipe, I believe.
Yes, he's got a pipe in his mouth in these pictures too.
Also a picture of the Lawrence Park Legion football team, I was there, that has two runners in it, but one in the other, well, I think for the team.
Right.
They weren't about to reshoot the picture, but they made sure it never happened again.
Okay, Seamus, has his hand up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, just very briefly, Ron, just two very brief questions. One, and this is was purely through during my research 50 years ago, purely through conversations. My understanding, and I'm open to correction, was that Toronto Islands were sort of became a sort of a cottage country for people in the city who would go over to the islands for their cottages and sort of those who could afford to, and would stay there the whole summer, and then their husbands would come over on the weekends, probably Saturday afternoon to Monday morning, and then go back to work. And the other thing was I was interested in is that true? And number two, when did RCYC build that beautiful clubhouse on the island? Thank you.
Okay, the first thing is, yes, so there was a cottaging community, and there was also a community of permanent residents on the island, both. And that went from quite early times before the 20th century. There were people living on the island. There were hotels built on the island, not just Hanlan's Hotel, but other hotels. And so it was an active residential area. Remember too, that originally before 1858, the island wasn't an island. It was only opened by a storm that cut open what's now the area of the Eastern Gap. What was the second question again?
RCYC, when did they, first of all, assume, get a lease on property on the island? I don't know if they own it now. And when did they build that beautiful clubhouse and facilities?
The clubhouse is there now is 1922, but it was not the first clubhouse, not the first RCYC clubhouse on the island. There was an earlier clubhouse that appears in some pictures, and before that, RCYC was located on the city side. So it's all of the clubs in the city have moved locations over time. National has, Alexandra has. I guess the Toronto Sailing and Canoe Club is in its original location, but Queen City and so on, they've all had other locations at points along the way. The Argonaut Rowing Club used to be a city center rowing club.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ron. That was a fascinating trip back into the past. Interesting to see the evolution of the island through the maps. You know, your first map of 1788, and then we get into the 1800s and into the 1900s, and of course we know what it looks like present day. But fascinating to see that. The Eastern Gap not there in the beginning, but there later on. The amusement park, and particularly that switchback roller coaster. I thought that was really quite interesting. You know, you had some shots of the ferries transporting people from the city mainland to the island. And I think one of the ferries that we're still using today is like 114 years in service, something like that. I don't know what they're keeping it together with. It's going to be replaced in the next couple of years, but it must be Band-Aids and baling wire. Anyway, the other parts, the Toronto Stadium history. I never would have imagined there were so many stadiums on the island. And obviously they were built out of wood if they caught on fire and burned down. And throughout your presentation, it was awfully nice to see all those old wooden sailboats. So that always makes me feel good when I see sailboats. So the cottages, the early history of planes and flying from the island area. And the other one you touched on that brought back a memory for me was the stereoscope. And the reason I say this is my grandparents had one of those, and my sister and I used to love going over there and putting the cards in there to look at the photographs in what would look like 3D. So that was a real interesting step back in history. Thank you very much, Ron. This has been fascinating. Okay, upcoming, next week, we're going to do, the second of, that TVO documentary, All Too Clear series, and it's, referring to the, beneath the surface of the Great Lakes and, the Kawaga mussels. We were introduced to those in part one, and, what they're trying to do about them, which, interestingly, I remember hearing and seeing much about the zebra mussels, but these Kawaga mussels look like they're even a bigger problem. So I'm very interested in see where we're going with that. There's evidently a professor in Milwaukee, Harvey Bootsma, and he has somewhat of a project, a device that he thinks he can help with this problem. So anyway, I think that sounds very, very interesting. And on February 12th, next week is an in-person meeting here. February 12th, it will be a Zoom only, and we've got George Hume, who is going to bring us the history of the Eddystone Light. The Eddystone Light is the world's first open ocean lighthouse, and it was completed in 1699. So I think that looks very, very interesting coming up. Anyway, at this point, we're going to head to lunch here at the club. And just a reminder that by sharing a meal and singing a shanty together, guests become shellbacks for life. And when you cross that great sandbar in the sky, then you may well meet a shellback waiting to welcome you there. So with that, we will do pipes out, please, Elspeth. Okay. Thank you. Okay.